On the line with us is State Senator David Zuckerman. He's a state senator in the great state of Vermont, my old home, and the legislature's website is legislature.vermont.gov. Senator Zuckerman, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. I understand that Vermont might be the first state to legalize marijuana, not by citizen petition, which is how it's happened in the four, arguably five states that have done it so far, but by the legislature. Do I have that right?
If we're first to do it, we would be first, clearly. I think it's a little bit of a, quote, race between us, maybe Rhode Island, maybe New York, but I think we've got a solid foothold on the possibility.
I'm assuming that you have strong backing from the citizenry of the state of Vermont?
I think it's a pretty solid support out there. There have been polls over the last number of years showing it. I don't think Vermonters consider marijuana to be in the same class of drugs as some of the more serious drugs that have been causing some real challenges in our society, frankly, across the country, but here in Vermont as well. And folks are ready to see it regulated much more like alcohol.
Yeah, which is probably a really, really good thing. Where is this legislatively right now in Vermont?
Sure. I introduced the bill earlier this week. It's Bill S-95. It got assigned to the Judiciary Committee. Certainly I've got 2 of the 5 votes there, and I'm pretty sure 3, which would be ultimately enough, but it's going to take some time. The chairman is cautious about it. We've got some other really big issues around children and families issues and in Vermont, so he's working on those as higher priorities. But we're laying the groundwork this year, both in that committee, economic development, health, agriculture, government operations. It's actually a topic that has a lot of different committees' purview, and I hope to get some hearings this year to really lay the groundwork for hitting the ground running in January.
Do you see? I mean, we have 2 states right now that have done this and apparently done it well: Washington State and Colorado. And you've got 2 other states that are in the process, Alaska and Oregon, and then Washington, D.C., that my understanding of what the mayor is telling, Mayor Bowser is telling us here in D.C., pot's going to be legal in another week and a half, but there's no mechanism for selling it or buying it or anything else because Andy Harris and the U.S. House of Representatives has blocked it. But basically, we've got 2 states that have already set up programs that seem to be working well and 2 other states that are working on it. Do you have a model in mind, or are you starting this thing from scratch?
Well, certainly looking to many of those states to get an understanding of how it's working and how it isn't. Vermont has one of the more conservative medical use laws, which I think actually sets us up well for the regulated recreational or consumer use side of the equation. Because I think it is working generally well in Colorado, but there are a few glitches. We're looking at things like the edibles, which I think is a very big section of this topic, and making sure that it's child-proof packaging and not appealing to children, not mirroring children's foods like gummy bears.
Right.
But at the same time, I think we're looking at Colorado as clear evidence that the sky doesn't fall, potentially some other drug use goes down. Driving under the influence has not seemed to be a major issue. I talk to my colleagues here who say, what about all the people that are going to drive under the influence? And I remind them that about 1/10 of the population is using marijuana each month here in Vermont today, according to the RAND study, and we don't have massive marijuana driving accidents being reported. It's still alcohol, which is a much more serious consequence drug.
Right.
So we're taking what we can from elsewhere, and we're also putting a Vermont sort of stamp on it as far as how we do things around here fairly sensibly. And, as you know, with some other issues in the past, if we do it well and we lead the way, hopefully some others will follow suit.
Yeah. Were you encouraged, or did it have any impact in Vermont? I'm curious. The story that was in the Daily Beast last week about the guy who took 90 times the normal adult dose of marijuana just to see what would happen.
Well, I actually hadn't heard about that, although I'm well aware that the whole risk of, quote, overdosing for marijuana is clearly a significantly lower risk than it is from alcohol poisoning or obviously some of the really horrendous drugs that are out there where either because they're laced or because they're stronger than someone thought, they can OD and die.
Yeah,
I think we all pretty well recognize that, sort of one of the biggest consequences from too much THC is ultimately falling asleep.
That's
exactly. We don't want people falling asleep behind the wheel of a car. That could have a different consequence. But
right.
Whether it be the Maureen Dowd scenario, which also got a lot of news, making sure people know how much to use. And I think those are some of the lessons from Colorado that folks who recreationally use today illegally might know how much to use or how much not to use. But we have a pretty large population that may choose to try it once, just like they go have a beer once in a while. They don't really know how much they're supposed to have. So we want to make sure there's good information for people so that they don't have bad experiences.
Yeah, just FYI, this was a hysterical story. This guy, he went to Denver. 10 milligrams of pot of THC is a very strong intoxicating dose, right? That's, if you really want to get high, you hit 10 milligrams. And you can buy 10 milligram chocolates, 1-dose chocolates. And he bought 90 of them and ate them all at once, thinking that he was going to write the great Hunter S. Thompson Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas novel about bats flying out of the sky and carrying him away or something. And what happened was he got somewhat high for a few minutes, said, oh, yeah, I recognize this. I'm really stoned. And then he fell asleep for 17 hours.
So I was going to say, he probably was out for quite a while.
Yeah, 900 milligrams of THC. 10 milligrams is an effective dose. Really, 2 or 3 milligrams is an effective dose. 10 milligrams is a high dose. 10 milligrams is maybe the equivalent of 2 glasses of wine if you want to make an alcohol comparison, or maybe even 3. And he took 90 times that. If you did that with alcohol, you'd be so dead. So.
Well, and I look at issues like around domestic violence around the Super Bowl, which we all know is unfortunately, while it's a great game, it's one of the hardest day on women in our society. And a lot of that's around alcohol.
Yeah.
And most people I know, granted, sometimes they're joking about it, sometimes they're serious, but the real bottom line is you see a lot less violence from people who are high on marijuana as opposed to alcohol.
Well, Colorado has seen this. They've actually seen their violent crime rate go down since they decriminalized pot, and they've seen their alcohol abuse rate go down.
Well, that's exactly right. And I've also been talking with some of my colleagues here in the legislature to say, most industries and businesses in society pay taxes for the greater good of society, whether it be roads or it be, social services, et cetera. We have a whole market that's happening today, and they're not actually paying their fair share. So it's again, not as if we're creating something new. We're just simply changing how it's regulated and seen in our society. And actually, I've been getting reasonably good conversations with a lot of my colleagues. The reception's been better than I expected.
Yeah, I think what's happening is that, people are realizing that they got snookered. We all got snookered back in the 30s into thinking that a relatively benign weed was some sort of evil drug. And B, the rise of the libertarian strain within the Republican Party is fracturing that right-wing caucus that used to just be a wall of opposition to pot, and the libertarians are going, hey, it's pot. It's not a big deal. It's, freedom works kind of thing,
Well, I agree, and I think ultimately people are ahead of the curve once again on this, just as they showed in Colorado and other states where when it was offered up as a referendum, it's been passing.
Right.
Sometimes politicians, we tend to be a more cautious bunch because you don't want to get a reactionary throw the bums out kind of situation. I'm a little less cautious than some of my colleagues on any number of issues, whether it was marriage equality or GMO labeling, et cetera. But so a lot of people expected that I would do this. But we've done medical use here. We've decriminalized it here. And the colleagues of mine that are still here have said those weren't major problems for their constituents. And so I think that's one of the reasons we have a possibility of doing it here as well. We're a relatively small state, relatively directly connected with our constituents. And
that's great. State Senator David Zuckerman of the great state of Vermont. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for having me.
Great talking with you.